The moment the Apache warrior stepped into the saloon, the room seemed to shrink around him. Smoke curled lazily toward the ceiling, mixing with the acrid scent of whiskey and sweat. The boards creaked under boots, glasses rattled on the counter, and conversation stuttered into uneasy silence. Madeline, 30, stood behind the bar, wiping her hands on a flour-dusted apron, her heart hammering not from fear alone, but from the sharp, assessing gaze of the man who had just entered. He was unlike anyone she had ever seen, tall, broad-shouldered, sun-darkened skin glinting under the flickering lantern light, his long black hair framing a face carved with both pride and patience. Tribal jewelry jingled faintly with each step he took, a sound that resonated against the old timber walls like a warning. She kept her hand steady as she placed a plate of stew before a regular, her fingers brushing the edge of the bowl almost reverently. The warrior's eyes were on her, not with cruelty, but with an intensity that made her pulse spike. Every instinct in her screamed caution, yet a strange curiosity prickled beneath her ribs. "I serve more than food. Apache," she said, voice level but tinged with steel. Her words cut through the thick air like a whip, carrying both warning and challenge. He paused, lips twitching as if amused, yet he did not smile fully. The room seemed to hold its breath, the few patrons frozen in their seats. Afraid to break the fragile tension, a tumbleweed rolled past the front door, stirred by the dry desert wind outside, and Madeline's gaze followed it, wishing the moment were simpler. She had worked in this saloon for years, pouring drinks, cleaning tables, listening to the endless gossip of travelers and cowboys. Yet never had she felt a presence like this, something both ancient and immediate. Like a force of the land itself had stepped across the threshold. "Your fire is fierce," the warrior said finally, his voice low, rough as stone. He took a step closer, and she felt it in her chest, a vibration of energy that went beyond fear. She straightened, planting her hands firmly on the bar, her knuckles whitening. "And it would be wise for you to mind where it burns," she countered, forcing her calm into her words. He tilted his head, eyes dark and unblinking. "You are unlike the others," he said. The comment was not praise nor a threat, yet it carried weight. He moved with a grace that seemed at odds with his size, each motion deliberate, measured, dangerous. Madeline's stomach twisted, a mix of apprehension and fascination. She had been independent all her life, raised in a town where women were often shadows behind men's boots. Yet here she stood, unshaken. Still, her instincts whispered, this was a man who could alter the course of lives without a second thought. A sudden crash from the back of the saloon drew both their gazes. A young boy had knocked over a chair, and the clang echoed like a gunshot in the tense silence. Madeline hurried to steady the chair, muttering a soft apology. But the warrior's gaze remained fixed on her, unwavering, like he had seen her soul in that tiny, chaotic moment. She wiped her hands again, forcing herself to breathe. The sweat prickling at her hairline was from the desert heat outside, but also from the presence of the man who now leaned slightly on the bar, silent, watching. The hum of tension was electric, almost painful, and yet, somewhere deep inside her, Madeline recognized a spark, a challenge she could not ignore. "You run this place with more than food," he said, voice dropping even lower, closer. "You run it with fire." "And fire can consume, Apache," she replied evenly, letting her gaze meet his without flinching. "Sometimes it must. Sometimes it must burn to protect what's left." The air thickened, heavy with dust and scent, and Madeline felt the pull of something larger than herself, something that had been quietly waiting beyond the swinging doors of the saloon. For the first time, she wondered if she was ready to face it, and whether she would have the courage to fight the desire that shimmered in his dark, endless eyes. Outside, the wind rattled the boards and carried the faint whistle of a desert breeze. hinting at dangers yet unseen and promises of adventures she could not have imagined. Madeline took a deep breath, bracing herself. The Apache warrior did not blink, did not speak further, but the weight of his presence pressed against her chest like the desert sun, hot and unrelenting. In that instant, she understood. The world beyond these saloon doors had shifted, and nothing inside or outside would ever be the same again. The sun was melting behind the jagged horizon when Madeline pushed through the saloon doors, her boots kicking up clouds of fine desert dust. Her chest heaved with exhaustion, but she refused to look back. She knew he followed silent, steady, like a shadow that had stepped from the wilderness itself. The Apache warrior's presence clung to her awareness, a taut line of tension that made her pulse both frantic and alive. She led him toward the canyon, a deep scar in the edge of the desert that cut the landscape in harsh, beautiful angles. The walls rose like guardians, jagged and red, catching the last rays of the sun and throwing molten shadows across the dusty path. Madeline could feel the heat of the day still lingering in the stone beneath her fingers in the coarse grit of the trail. Each step she took sent small stones clattering, yet he did not hurry. He moved with deliberate ease, his bare chest glistening faintly with the sweat of the afternoon, muscles shifting with silent power. "Why do you follow me?" she demanded, voice sharp enough to bite, yet carried by a tremor of exhaustion. He paused, a few paces behind, hands resting casually at his sides. "Because you are unlike anyone I have ever seen," he said, eyes dark and unyielding. "You run like fire, and I do not chase what can be tamed. I follow what challenges me." Madeline's fingers tightened around the strap of her satchel, her knuckles white. "I am not to be followed," she said. Her voice carried over the canyon like the wind, bouncing off the walls in an echo that made her ears ring. For a moment, the only sounds were her breathing, the distant caw of a crow, and the soft crunch of dirt under his boots. The canyon seemed to hold its breath, as if even the earth itself were waiting for her answer. They came to a narrow ledge where the canyon walls pressed close, cliffs on either side casting deep shadows. Madeline's stomach knotted. She could jump, she could run further, but the path behind was nearly impossible. Ahead, the canyon opened slightly into a hidden plateau, and she could feel the wind picking up, swirling dust and carrying the scent of sagebrush. She inhaled sharply, letting the dry air fill her lungs, tasting freedom and fear all at once. "You do not need to follow me," she said, finally stopping. "Go back to your people. Go back to the plains. I will not be claimed." He stopped a few feet from her, and for the first time, Madeline saw a flicker of respect or perhaps curiosity in his gaze. "I do not seek to claim," he said softly, "but I will not abandon what I have chosen to see." His voice was low, reverberating like the hollow echoes of the canyon. "There is strength in your defiance. It is rare." She shook her head, brushing a lock of hair from her face, sweat and dust clinging to her skin. "Strength is not always admired," she said. "Sometimes it is punished." He took a slow step closer, sun glinting off the edges of his tribal jewelry. Each piece beaded necklaces, feathered adornments, armbands of polished bone seemed to hum with the history of his people. His gaze never left hers, heavy with unspoken understanding. Madeline felt the canyon's wind brush past them both, a whispering reminder of how small humans were against the vastness of the land. "I have faced fire," he said, voice steady. "I have walked deserts, fought men who sought to take what was not theirs. You are different, but I see the fire in your eyes, and it is worth the risk." Her pulse raced, not just from fear, but from the raw presence of him, the power that radiated in each measured movement. She wanted to turn, to run again, but her feet were rooted in the gravel. There was something about him, something untamed, relentless, and yet patient, that made her heart beat faster than any fear. For a long moment, Silence stretched between them. The canyon whispered its secrets around them, stones warm beneath the sinking sun, wind stirring their hair. Madeline realized the Apache warrior was not merely a threat. He was a mirror, reflecting the fire within her that few dared to face. She swallowed, letting the wind carry her words. "I do not belong to anyone." "And yet," he replied, voice soft like the desert dusk, "you stand here with me, and I would follow you anywhere." Madeline glanced down at her hands, then back to the canyon walls, the golden light painting the jagged rock in surreal shades of red and orange. Somewhere deep in the shadows, she felt the stirrings of an uneasy trust and a dangerous curiosity that would not let her walk away. The Apache warrior watched her, silent, waiting. The canyon seemed to breathe with them, a living corridor of challenge, defiance, and something that promised more than either dared to admit. Thunder growled across the desert like an angry beast, shaking the loose boards of the abandoned miner's cabin where Madeline had taken refuge. The wind slammed against the walls, rattling the lanterns and sending a cascade of dust swirling through the narrow room. She pressed her back against the rough wooden planks, her breath shallow, listening to the storm batter the world outside. The Apache warrior waited silently beyond the doorway, visible only in fleeting shadows cast by lightning. Her heart raced, not from fear of the storm alone, but from the tension of having him so close. His presence filled the small cabin without words. She could feel the subtle strength radiating from his taut muscles, the quiet patience of someone used to survival in harsh lands. His long black hair was plastered to his damp skin, beads of water running down the contours of his chest. The tribal jewelry adorning him, armbands, necklaces, and feathers swayed faintly as he shifted, each movement deliberate, heavy with restrained energy. "I told you to go back," she said, her voice cracking just slightly over the roar of the wind. "I am not yours." He stepped fully inside, the faint scent of earth and smoke clinging to him. "I never claimed you," he said, voice low and steady, blending with the rumble of the storm. "But I will not leave you to face the night alone." Lightning split the sky, illuminating his features in stark relief. Strong jaw, high cheekbones, eyes dark and unwavering. Madeline's chest tightened. She had lived alone in the frontier long enough to know that survival required both caution and courage. And yet, as the storm's fury encircled them, she felt a strange pull, something that challenged her independence. Her careful control. Rain began to hammer the tin roof, drumming like a relentless drumbeat, shaking loose the dust of years. Madeline lit a lantern, the warm glow pushing back the shadows, revealing the cabin's sparse interior, a broken cot, a half-filled barrel, and the remnants of what had once been a miner's life. She could hear his breathing, steady, measured, a sharp contrast to her own. "I can take care of myself," she said, trying to reclaim some of her composure. "You don't need to be here." He crouched slightly to inspect a broken floorboard, as if the cabin itself were a puzzle he intended to understand. "Strength is not only in solitude," he replied. "It is also in knowing when to stand together." Madeline's hands trembled as she refilled a small basin of water, the cool liquid running over her fingers. Each drop seemed magnified in the tense silence. She glanced at him, and for a moment, their eyes met hers wide with defiance, his steady with a mix of respect and something deeper, almost like admiration. The Apache warrior did not touch her, did not speak further, yet the cabin felt alive with his presence. A gust of wind rattled the boards overhead, and the lantern flickered, throwing shadows across his chest, accentuating the play of muscle and bone. The storm raged outside, but here, inside the small space, time seemed to stretch, leaving only the sound of rain, the creak of wood, and the unspoken understanding between them. "You are not like anyone else," he said finally, voice barely above the storm. "You are fire wrapped in flesh, unyielding, unbroken. I respect that. I cannot leave it behind." Madeline swallowed, her throat dry. "Respect does not bind me," she said. "It does not grant you ownership. You must remember that." He nodded, slow and deliberate, and stepped closer. She could feel the heat of him without a touch, the power in his presence pressing gently against the edges of her control. For a fleeting moment, she considered running, fleeing into the darkness and leaving him behind. But the storm outside mirrored something inside her, a wild, relentless current that would not be denied. Lightning struck again, blinding in its brilliance, and Madeline felt the cabin shake beneath her feet. The Apache warrior's eyes caught hers in the flash, unwavering, and in that instant, she understood. Survival in the frontier was no longer just a matter of skill or courage. It was also a matter of trust, of recognizing strength where it stood before her, and of confronting desires that could not be ignored. Even in the face of danger, the wind howled around them. The rain hammered the tin roof, and in the heart of the storm, Madeline realized that the night had changed everything. Outside, the desert roared with life, but inside, in the small lantern-lit cabin, two souls measured each other across a silent chasm of respect, fear, and undeniable connection. Morning light spilled across the desert plateau, gold and sharp, illuminating the jagged canyon walls and the scattered dust that clung stubbornly to everything. Madeline stepped carefully among the rocks, her boots crunching against the gravel, her chest still thrumming from the storm's aftermath. She had barely slept, but the quiet of the morning offered her a fragile sense of calm. The Apache warrior stood a few feet behind her, shirtless, his long black hair damp from the night's rain, tribal jewelry catching the light and glinting with every subtle movement. He watched her, patient and unyielding, his dark eyes taking in every motion with a quiet fascination. Madeline felt the tension from yesterday's storm lingering in the air between them. But this morning there was no threat, only the vastness of the canyon and the raw beauty of the desert. Ahead, a skittish Mustang pawed at the ground near a makeshift corral. Its coat was dusty, matted with dried mud, and its eyes darted nervously at every shadow. Madeline approached slowly, crouching slightly, speaking softly in tones meant more for the animal than anyone else. "Easy, girl. Easy now," she murmured, running her hand along the horse's neck. She felt the muscles tense under her palm, the rapid heartbeat thrumming like her own. The Apache warrior moved silently closer, studying her hands, her posture, the careful way she coaxed the horse forward. "You tame them as you tame nothing else," he said, voice low. Carrying across the morning air, Madeline paused, looking over her shoulder at him, letting a small, dry laugh escape. "Strength is not always shown in force," she replied. Her voice was calm, but her heart pounded from the proximity of him. The horse whinnied softly, easing slightly against her touch. As if acknowledging her control and patience, he stepped closer, the dust of the desert clinging to his skin, the faint scent of rain lingering in his hair. "It is rare," he said. "Many see only struggle or try to impose power. But you listen." Madeline smiled faintly, brushing a loose strand of hair from her face. "Listening is the first step to understanding," she said. She had lived in this harsh land long enough to know the importance of patience. And understanding can save more lives than a rifle ever could. The Apache warrior tilted his head slightly, as if measuring the weight of her words. "You are fire," he said softly. "And fire can burn or it can illuminate." Her pulse quickened, a strange mixture of caution and something else she refused to name. She focused on the horse, guiding it carefully along the edge of the plateau, feeling the heat of the desert stone under her boots, the wind tugging at her hair and dress. He followed, silent, yet every step of his seemed to match hers. a rhythm she couldn't ignore. Hours passed in quiet coordination. Madeline coaxed the horse forward, gently correcting its missteps, murmuring words that seemed to soothe the animal's fear. The Apache warrior observed, occasionally offering subtle guidance, not with command, but with gestures, his presence steadying the situation. She could feel the contrast, his raw strength beside her careful control. And yet somehow, the two forces harmonized. At the edge of the plateau, the canyon stretched into a breathtaking panorama of desert mesas, golden light illuminating every jagged curve and shadowed crevice. Madeline finally stood, brushing sweat and dust from her hands, feeling a rare surge of triumph. The horse now followed her willingly, its trust earned. The Apache warrior stepped up beside her, eyes scanning the horizon with a quiet intensity. "You could lead armies with that patience," he said, a faint smile brushing his lips. Madeline laughed softly, a sound mingling with the whispering wind. "Or tame wild spirits," she said, glancing at him, daring him to meet her eyes. For a brief moment, the canyon seemed to hold its breath, witnessing the unspoken respect between them. "Perhaps both," he said finally, voice low and steady, his gaze locking with hers. "Perhaps both are needed to survive this land." The desert stretched endlessly around them, harsh, beautiful, and full of secrets yet to be discovered. And in that moment, Madeline realized something. Survival was never just about skill or courage. It was also about recognizing strength in unexpected places and perhaps about understanding the fire in someone else without losing the fire inside herself. News traveled fast in frontier towns, faster than dust kicked up by horses or the echo of gunfire. By mid-morning, Madeline knew the sheriff had heard of the Apache warrior's presence. He had arrived at the saloon, stern-faced, spurs clinking against the wooden floorboards, his mustache twitching with irritation. Word of an approaching outlaw gang had spread, and the sheriff's fear mingled with suspicion, painting a dangerous picture for anyone who dared stand outside the town's narrow codes. Madeline had fled the saloon again, knowing that staying would draw the wrath of both lawmen and townsfolk. The Apache warrior followed silently, shadows blending with the early light, his presence as constant and steady as the canyon wall she had climbed the day before. Together, they reached the barn she kept on the outskirts of town, a small, weathered structure that smelled of hay and earth. A safe haven where she could think and prepare. "They want you gone," she said, her voice tight, low enough that the wind carried it only to him. "The sheriff believes you are a threat, the town. They will not hesitate to attack if they think you endanger them." He nodded, muscles tense, dark eyes scanning the horizon. "I have faced danger before," he said. "But you are caught in their fear. And I will not let them strike you while I can stand between them and harm." Madeline swallowed hard, heart hammering. She had never asked for his protection, nor did she want it in the sense most people would expect. She had survived alone, relied on her skill, her wits, her patience. And yet, standing next to him, feeling the subtle strength of his presence, she realized the frontier was more dangerous than she had admitted, and that alone. She might not withstand the storm to come. "They are armed," she said, glancing at the weapons stacked against the barn wall, rifles, pistols, a few sharpened knives. Her hands brushed against a worn rifle, calloused fingers tracing the smooth metal. "If they come, they will not hesitate. We must prepare." He stepped closer, careful not to crowd her, his bare chest glistening with sweat in the morning sun. Tribal jewelry jingled faintly as he shifted his weight. "Then we prepare together," he said. "Not because I claim you, but because no one should face such fear alone." Madeline nodded, a mixture of gratitude and apprehension stirring inside her. She moved with purpose, securing the barn doors, stacking hay bales near the entrances, checking the weapons. Every motion was precise, controlled, a dance of survival she had practiced all her life. Yet the presence of the Apache warrior added something unfamiliar, a steady reassurance. Like a river cutting through a desert canyon. Strong enough to change the course of everything. Hours passed in tense silence. The wind carried the scent of sage and distant smoke from the town. Madeline could hear the occasional creak of a board, the whisper of the horse in its stall, and the faint rustle of him moving just behind her. She stole glances at his profile, high cheekbones, dark eyes scanning the horizon, long black hair damp with sweat and desert dust, muscles flexing beneath the tribal jewelry that marked him as both warrior and protector. By late afternoon, the horizon darkened with the approach of clouds and the faint glint of metal. Outlaws were nearing the town, their intent clear in the way they moved, the glint of weapons catching the sun. Madeline's stomach twisted with both fear and resolve. She had never wished for violence, yet she knew it might be unavoidable. And standing beside her, the Apache warrior exuded a calm readiness, as if the storm outside reflected the fire within him. "You will not face this alone," he said quietly. Madeline felt the weight of his words in her chest, heavy with unspoken promise. She nodded, a mixture of defiance and trust sparking in her veins. The desert wind whipped around them, carrying with it the scent of sage, dust, and an impending battle. And for the first time in days, Madeline realized that survival was not merely a matter of skill or courage. It was also about choosing allies wisely, understanding when strength was needed, and embracing the unspoken bond that could tip the scales between life and death. The barn doors rattled as the wind picked up, and Madeline's hand went to the rifle once more. Outside, the town's dusty streets stretched into the heat shimmer of the horizon, and the shadow of approaching danger fell across the land. The Apache warrior stood beside her, steady as stone, and in that moment, she understood that whatever came next, she would not face it alone. The sun bled crimson behind the mesas, painting the town in streaks of gold and blood. Dust swirled along the deserted streets, catching in Madeline's hair and clinging to her boots. She crouched behind a stack of crates near the saloon, rifle trembling slightly in her hands. Her pulse raced, but she forced herself to breathe steadily, recalling every lesson the frontier had taught her: patience, observation, precision. The Apache warrior stood beside her, shirtless, muscles tensed like coiled springs, long black hair sticking to his sweat-darkened skin. Tribal jewelry glinted in the dying light, feathers, beads, and polished bone catching the sun like fire. His dark eyes scanned the horizon with the precision of a hawk, lips set in a hard line. For a moment, Madeline's fear faltered, replaced by awe. He was not just a warrior. He was the desert itself, powerful, unyielding, and patient. Across the street, the outlaw gang emerged from the shadows, their horses' hooves kicking up clouds of dust. Rifles rested against shoulders, eyes narrowed, ready for blood. Madeline felt the weight of their intent, the heat of their danger pressing in. She adjusted her grip on the rifle, teeth clenched, adrenaline pumping like wildfire. "You will aim carefully," the Apache warrior said softly, voice low and calm. "Do not waste energy. Only strike when necessary." Madeline nodded, focusing on the movements of the outlaws. Her finger hovered near the trigger, the smell of gunpowder and dust mingling in her nostrils. Somewhere deep in the shadows of the street, she could hear the wind whistling through broken boards, the faint rustle of a dog scuttling away. The world seemed to contract, every sound amplified, every movement exaggerated. A sudden flick of the leader's hand signaled the start of the confrontation. Rifles raised and the quiet tension shattered like glass. Shots rang out, echoing against the canyon walls and the wooden structures of the town. Madeline ducked behind a barrel, the heat of a near miss burning her cheek as she returned fire. Steadying her breath, the Apache warrior moved with fluid precision, stepping into the line of danger without hesitation. His long hair swirled with each movement, muscles coiling and uncoiling as he deflected attacks and disarmed the reckless outlaws. He was a whirlwind of strength and strategy, calm and deadly in equal measure. Madeline's eyes tracked him as he protected townsfolk and allies alike, the glint of his jewelry flashing in the firelight of the sunset and gunfire. For a heartbeat, their eyes met across the chaos. Madeline felt something stir inside her, admiration, relief, and the raw pull of connection that had grown stronger with every encounter. He gave no sign of indulgence or arrogance, only a steady assurance that she was not alone. And for the first time, she truly believed it. The fight raged, dust and smoke curling into the amber sky. Madeline fired with controlled precision, each shot purposeful, each breath measured. The Apache warrior's presence beside her was a shield, a force that moved in tandem with her instincts, guiding, protecting, and inspiring her to act with courage she hadn't known she possessed. As the last of the outlaws fell or fled into the desert, silence returned to the streets. Dust hung heavy in the air, mingling with the acrid scent of gunpowder and sweat. Madeline lowered her rifle, heart pounding, adrenaline still coursing. She glanced at the Apache warrior. He stood tall, chest rising and falling, eyes dark and unreadable, yet softened slightly by a trace of acknowledgement. "You survived," he said quietly. Voice low enough to carry only to her, Madeline exhaled, the tension leaving her in shivering waves. "We survived," she corrected, a small smile breaking through her exhaustion. The canyon and town bore witness to their triumph, not as individual fighters, but as a partnership forged under fire. As the sun dipped behind the mesas, casting long shadows across the streets, Madeline realized that the desert was more than a place of danger and solitude. It was a place where trust was earned, courage was tested, and bonds were formed in the crucible of fire and survival. Beside the Apache warrior, she felt the pulse of something larger than either of them, a connection rooted in respect, skill, and the shared fight to stand unbroken. The town was quiet now, the wind carrying away the last echoes of gunfire. And in the amber light of sundown, Madeline and the Apache warrior stood side by side, ready to face whatever the frontier would throw at them next. The desert night was quiet, almost unnervingly so, after the chaos of sundown. Madeline stood on the edge of the plateau overlooking the town, her hair whipping around her face in the cool breeze. The Apache warrior stood behind her, shirtless, muscles taut and defined under the moonlight, tribal jewelry glinting faintly with every subtle movement. His long black hair swayed with the wind, and his dark eyes were fixed on her, reflecting both respect and something unspoken, something that neither words nor distance could contain. She exhaled slowly, feeling the tension drain from her shoulders. The town below had been secured. The outlaws either fled or were captured. But the desert had a way of reminding you that peace was fleeting, that freedom was never guaranteed. Madeline's fingers brushed the edge of her satchel, and she realized she had never truly appreciated the weight of choice, the power to act, to survive, to decide her own fate. "You are different from anyone I have met," the Apache warrior said quietly, his voice carrying across the plateau like the whisper of wind through sagebrush. "Not just in fire, but in strength, in heart." Madeline turned, meeting his gaze. Her chest rose and fell with steady breaths, and though her mind told her to remain wary, her body acknowledged the pull she had felt since the first moment he entered the saloon. "I have always survived on my own," she said softly, her voice carrying both pride and caution. "I do not need to belong to anyone." He stepped closer, the shadows of moonlight tracing the contours of his body. the tribal jewelry catching glints of silver and bone. "And yet," he said, voice low, "you allow me to stand by your side. That is your choice. It does not diminish your strength." Madeline swallowed, heart fluttering in a way that startled her. The Apache warrior was not just a protector. He was a mirror, reflecting her fire and independence while challenging her to trust. She had faced storms, gunfights, and the harshest desert sun. Yet this unspoken connection was unlike anything she had ever endured. A soft rustle behind them made her glance back. The Mustang from the plateau wandered near the edge, nostrils flaring as it took in the scent of wind and freedom. Madeline smiled faintly, reaching out to run her hand along the animal's neck. The moment was fleeting but perfect, a reminder that life was more than survival. It was about connection, trust, and the choices that shaped destiny. "You have changed me," she admitted finally, voice barely above a whisper. "Not just because of your strength, but because you make me see my own fire differently. I can survive, yes, but I am not alone now." The Apache warrior's gaze softened, and for the first time he allowed a small, almost imperceptible smile to curve his lips. "You are fire and freedom," he said, "and the desert will not extinguish you." They stood together, shoulders brushing lightly, eyes scanning the horizon. The moon rose higher, casting silver light across the plateau, illuminating jagged rocks, windswept sage, and the distant glow of the town. In that light, Madeline understood that the frontier was not only a place of danger and solitude, it was a place of choice, courage, and unexpected alliances. A sudden gust of wind stirred the dust at their feet, carrying with it the scent of rain on the horizon, promising renewal. Madeline closed her eyes for a moment, breathing in the sharp desert air, feeling alive in a way she hadn't since she was a girl. The Apache warrior stayed close, silent, a steadfast presence, a reminder that some fires once kindled cannot be ignored. Finally, she opened her eyes, turning to him with a small, resolute smile. "We have survived," she said, voice steady now, carrying the strength that had always defined her. "And we will continue to survive, together if we choose." He nodded, stepping slightly closer, their shadows mingling in the moonlight. The desert stretched endlessly before them, vast and unforgiving, but filled with possibilities neither had dared imagine. And in that boundless frontier, two souls fierce, independent, and unbroken stood side by side, ready to face whatever came next. Madeline breathed deeply, feeling the pulse of the land, the heartbeat of freedom, and the quiet assurance of fire that could never be extinguished. The Apache warrior, equally unyielding, met her gaze. And in that shared silence, they understood the truth of survival. Courage is measured not only in battles fought, but in the strength to trust, to connect, and to embrace the fire within.